There is only one instrument that can turn mere mortals into gods. Imagine presents the story of the guitar, Sunday at 10:20 on BBC One.
On tonight's slice of must-see TV, join me, Michael and Diane. We'll be talking sex, money and Westminster spice with the BBC's top doll, Martha Carney, and sex show siren Anna Richardson. That's this week after Question Time. You'd be bonkers to miss it.
So the topical debate gets underway on BBC One now with David Dimbleby.
Welcome to Question Time. Tonight, our questions come from Birmingham. And with us here, the Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, the former Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Heseltine, Charles Kennedy, leader of the Liberal Democrats when they had their best results for 81 years, Richard Lambert, Director General of the CBI, ex-editor of the Financial Times, and the journalist and broadcaster Janet Street Porter. Welcome to the Great Hall of Birmingham University, and our audience here, as always, will be asking the questions. And at home, if you want to comment, you can, as always, comment. If you want to text us, 83981 is the number to text us on. CFAX page 155 will tell you what others are saying. If you're watching digitally, push the red button. And as ever, you can email us during the programme with your comments. Our first question tonight comes from Gail Marsh, please.
Was the Home Secretary's sidestepped in Ian Blair's resignation decision?
Was the Home Secretary, sitting on my left, sidestepped in Ian Blair's resignation decision? Home Secretary?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say about Ian Blair, as I said today, is that I think actually he has done a very good job as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and not only in terms of the job he's done in London, but significantly with a national role as well, because the role the Metropolitan Commissioner has in addressing terrorism is as important on the streets of Birmingham as it is on the streets of London. The second point is, I think actually when you ask somebody, as we do with a Metropolitan Commissioner, to do a difficult and demanding job as an elected politician, you should give that person the support to do it. The third thing is, as Ian has made clear, it was, frankly, because the Mayor said on his first day as chair of the Metropolitan Police Authority that he didn't feel that he had confidence in Sir Ian, that Sir Ian took the decision to resign, which I accepted when he came to talk to me about it today.
Would you have chosen him for another term as Chief Police of the Met?
Well, I don't think Ian had ever suggested that he wanted to serve another term, but what is important when you are both choosing and when you're supporting somebody that you're asking to do a job like that is that actually, frankly, you keep party politics out of it. You are careful that the processes that are in place are followed carefully. You need to work alongside people, and frankly, you should put a bit of time and effort into that before you jump to judgment.
But you, as Home Secretary, then, are powerless in the choice of who runs the biggest police force in Britain.
No, that's not the case. I've made clear today, given that Sir Ian has made the decision to resign, that I'm starting now the process to ensure that we get a new Metropolitan Commissioner, because, as I have said, that is a role that is so important, one, for London, but two, for the country as a whole. And it's because that role is so important that I very much hope that we will not get ourselves into a situation where politicians of whatever colour feel that they need to prove themselves through taking action against somebody that we're asking to do that job. That's what I hope will happen when we move on to appoint the next person to carry out that difficult and demanding job, and who deserves the support, not only, I think, of the Home Secretary, but of other elected politicians with whom they have to work as well.
Okay. Michael Heseltine?
There's not a shred of evidence to suggest this is a political decision. The Conservatives have actually been calling for Sir Ian's resignation since he was criticised so roundly as the boss of the Metropolitan Police after the shooting in the Domenis case. Since then, there has been headline after headline about the racial issues that have gone on in the Metropolitan Police recently. In today's Daily Mail, stories about contracts being given to friends of the Commissioner. But the fact of the matter is, let's be absolutely clear about this, Boris Johnson is elected by the people of London to be the mayor. The mayor has no confidence in the Commissioner and said so. That is the privilege of being elected mayor. And if he doesn't have confidence, he is right to say it. And should he have confidence? Home Secretary, since you left your constituency, if that's where you came, in London, on average, there have been 3 gun crimes and 6 knife crimes in the last 3 hours. And you seriously telling me that that is not grounds for lack of confidence in the people responsible for running the policing of the Metropolitan Authority? The fact of the matter is, our police are hamstrung. They have got targets, they've got forms, they're kept in offices, and what we want is a quite different approach to clearing up crimes on Britain's streets. We have some of the worst prostitute problems, we have some of the worst drug problems, and we have a violence in our cities which is quite unacceptable. And I believe that one of the most important proposals the Conservative Party has put forward, adopted, I believe, by the Labour Party since, is that we're going to have elected chief bosses in our major police authorities, so that there is a local accountability, an identifiable chief constable, and I believe that the public will demand a far more zero-tolerance approach in our cities in dealing with crime.
So the Home Secretary should give up control over the appointment of police officers and it should be handed down locally. That's your view, is it?
To the people. Right. Because the fact of the matter is, it was a Labour Home Secretary who resigned recently who said the Home Office is not fit for purpose.
All right.
And he's right.
All right. I agree with that, yes. While it's hot in the memory, perhaps you better have a chance just to answer Michael Hesselden before I go to the other members of the panel.
First of all, Michael, you've thrown around a fair few allegations. I have to say I hope we're not going to expect people to resign from any public job simply because there's a story about them on the front of the Daily Mail. But let's be clear, there is a process in place for all of the allegations that you suggested. Inquiries into concerns about the contract, an inquest going on about the terrible death of John Charles de Menezes. There is a process in place. The point is that actually, for whatever reason, the Mayor chose not to respect that process, and on his first day as chair of the Metropolitan Police Authority, to take the decision that he took.
Why couldn't Ian Blair say, I've got the backing of the Home Secretary, I was appointed by the Home Secretary, not by the Mayor of London, I'm going to stay here until, until what? He couldn't be removed.
Because when you're doing a job as difficult as we asked the Met to do, for example, in bringing down gun and knife crime, and actually...
All right, when you're doing a job as difficult as that,
sorry,
go on.
and let me just be clear, gun crime, for example, is lower now than it was last year. There is a big problem with knife crime.
Can you finish the other sentence? When you've got a lot of responsibilities.
There is a big problem with knife crime, but frankly, the idea that our police alone can solve that, I think is wrong. They need politicians and the community standing alongside them. And in terms of getting out and about on the streets, it was Ian Blair, actually, who pioneered, with the support of the government, and it's now everywhere in this country, neighbourhood policing teams that actually get out and work alongside the community to solve those problems.
Was he right to allow himself to be pushed out? That's what I'm asking you.
Well, I don't believe that I suspect he didn't feel that he had an option. He made the decision that he made, and as I say, I accepted his decision today.
Okay. The man there in the grey shirt. Pull over, yes.
I'd just like to say that what Jackie Smith has just said really does highlight why the police fail in this country. You said about the police have to go through processes. These processes of filling out forms of bureaucracy are exactly the reason why the police can't get out onto the streets and fight crime. And today, I think, if you really wanted Ian Blair to remain in his job, you as Home Secretary have the power to keep him in his job. And you know, you've not answered the question that Mr. Dimbleby put to you, or what the lady in the audience put. You really have highlighted what is wrong with our police system, and can you change it for us as the government, or otherwise we will kick you out?
We'll come back to that key question you put about why the Home Secretary didn't insist he stayed in a moment. Richard Lambert.
When you think of the troubles that Sir Ian has had and his predecessors have had before him over time, you think this is an impossible job. And I actually think we ought to be asking whether the range of responsibilities that you've described, Home Secretary, are actually doable. I mean, he's responsible for a very large part of the National Police Force. He's responsible for anti-terror activity on a wide scale. He's in a deeply political place. He's always being harried by the Daily Mail and others. He's accountable to the Home Secretary, to the Metropolitan Police Authority, and we learned today he's also accountable to the Mayor off his own bat. What kind of job description is that? I think we ought to be sitting down and thinking, is this a possible job? And if not, could we design one which is actually manageable? He's not the first guy to have had trouble in this job.
He's the first one to resign for almost 100 years.
1918, I believe, but the others, yes, I think you're right.
Janet Street Porter.
Well, the reason why he resigned was that it wasn't down to the front page of the Daily Mail. It was the feeling on the streets of London. I mean, when Boris Johnson expressed how strongly he felt about it, he was only articulating what people in London feel. I mean, I live right in the centre of London, and quite frankly, what's gone on over the shooting in Stockwell, how that's been handled, it just beggars belief. And also to see, as Michael has said, day after day, knife crimes on the street of London, and Jackie comes up with community policing and people who've got no real powers, kind of second division people who are supposed to patrol the streets, but they can't really arrest you, but they can write a lot of things down in notebooks. It doesn't really work. So, yes, it's true that we're asking too much from one man. We're asking him to combat terrorism and deal with stuff on the streets as well, and deal with police forces around the country. It can't work. But I think that Boris Johnson was articulating something that is felt so powerfully in London that Ian Blair ultimately had to bite the bullet and go.
Jackie Smith.
Let me just, let's come back to this point about what is the most effective way to bring down knife crime. I share people's concern, which is why, as Home Secretary, I've made sure that Ian Blair and the Met had the search arches and wands in order to be able to deter people from carrying knives, that when they got arrested, they were much more likely to end up in court, that now they are much more likely to have long sentences. But in the end, if we think that we can depend on the police alone to solve that problem, I think we're wrong. And secondly, if we think that it's going to be easier to solve violent crime by criticising and removing our support from the senior police officers that we ask to do difficult jobs, without actually having spent any period of time trying to work alongside somebody, well, I think we'll be letting down not just the police, but those people that we're asking them to serve as well. And I do believe we should free up the police. That's why I have proposed that we remove all but one target on the police. It's why last week I was clear that in all of the areas where there's knife crime, we'll remove the vast majority of forms and a large part of the crime recording that goes on. We are already doing that. But
I want to bring you back to what the young man up there said about Sir Ian Blair. If you believe all these things, did you A, try and persuade him to stay, and B, what does it say about your power as Home Secretary that you couldn't insist that he stayed?
Well, I don't think
Both
you can.
questions.
When somebody comes and they say to you, I have decided that I want to offer my resignation, I don't think actually it would have been the right thing to do for the people of London or for his national responsibilities to somehow or another persuade him against what he had decided to do to stay. I don't think that would have been the right thing to do, which is why now my priority, and I hope that there is support from all those who have the best interests of London and policing at heart, is to make sure that we get a new Metropolitan Police Commissioner who can carry out that very important role. I simply hope that when that happens, that is somebody who politicians, as well as the community, feel that they can stand shoulder to shoulder beside in order to solve the serious problems that we're asking that person to do.
Charles Kennedy.
Personally, I think Sir Ian Blair's position had become, over a number of years in fact, increasingly untenable. So I think on that basis, and I'm not including incidentally today's Daily Mail story, I don't know all the details of that, but I think the other items that have been referred to, and others besides, therefore I think he took the inevitable decision today. I think that as this debate unfolds, there will be more about this resignation which has got to do with those other matters rather than just the mayoral matter, the Boris Johnson issue in all of this.
What do you mean it'll be about the style of policing in London?
Oh, I think there'll be a wider debate about that. I think that's happening anyway, as a matter of fact, whoever the chief of the Metropolitan Police happens to be. And now that there's a vacancy, it opens it up all the more. No bad thing. But no, I think also the other issues that have caused controversy over a period of time. But there is a second thing here. Now, I'm out of step with my own party. I was when I was leader of the party on this matter. But based on my experience years ago in America and looking elsewhere in Europe, I've always been in favour of directly elected mayors. I think it's a way of breathing life into democracy. However, this particular issue raises some very important considerations as well. You can't do that job as Chief of the Met if you're lacking the confidence now in what's a tripartite arrangement, the Home Secretary of the day and the Mayor of London. However, should the Mayor of London, and it appears to be the case, perhaps not without the absolute endorsement of the Metropolitan Police Authority itself, and certainly clearly not seeing eye to eye with the Home Secretary of the day, be able to pull the rug. I think that's something we've got to be very careful about in this country. Here we are sitting in Birmingham tonight. Now, one day, if this great city with its fantastic history and civic traditions, which we're sitting in, if it has a directly elected, powerful mayor of the type that you have in London, I'm not sure that person should just be able to hire and fire the senior police officer handling security and policing for this area just on a whim. I think it's got to be in check, and that check, I think, has been rather worryingly disturbed by the events of today.
Okay. The woman in blue there.
I have to.
There, yes. You with the necklace on, yes?
Oh, me, sorry.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say that the causes of gun crime are multifaceted, and you can't put the responsibility on either politicians or the police force to solve it. Gun crime happens because of poverty and poor housing and worklessness, and unless the government address those issues, we will continue to have rising gun crime in all of our major cities.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to get the man here. Let's try and keep this to the issue of Ian Blair, because we have many discussions on those other points. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think given that Boris Johnson is not a saint himself, he may have just succeeded in making more enemies for himself, and this may spell serious consequences for, his, performance as a mayor.
Okay, and you, sir?
Leaving aside gun crime and knife crime, how much confidence can we have in an administration which fails to depart the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police after 2 years of catastrophic failures?
You think she should have sacked him?
I think so, yeah.
If Boris Johnson hadn't?
Definitely.
Did that ever occur to you?
Well, crime is down in London, notwithstanding the serious concerns that there are about knife crime. Neighbourhood policing is in place across London and was early.
You heard what Janet Street-Porter said there about London.
Confidence in neighbourhood policing.
Well, Janet,
it's a sticking plaster. It's policing on the cheap.
No, neighbourhood policing. Janet, you're talking down the role of police community support officers, which I have to say where I live are extremely popular. Neighbourhood policing is actually about police officers out on the streets whose names you know, who you can actually get in touch with, who deal with the sorts of things that are worrying you and that and help to build confidence. That's a good thing, isn't it? Police officers out working alongside communities, free to actually do the things that local people are important, and that I think is important, and that's one of the areas that Sir Ian Blair led in the Met and is now everywhere in the country over the last few years.
I'll take one more point from the woman there in blue. You.
Just going on the man's point down the front, is by helping to get rid of Ian Blair, does Boris Johnson want to actually take over the Met as well as everything else in his office?
Michael Heseltine, what do you think Boris Johnson's up to?
When the power of the mayor was defined, there was a shared responsibility between the mayor and the Home Office, and Boris Johnson wants to do the job the people of London elected him to do, quite rightly. But I think that the Home Secretary has made a rather curious point. that, first of all, this was a party political decision by the Conservatives, which I wholly reject. And yet when it came to her deciding whether or not to acquiesce in the dismissal or the resignation of Ian Blair, she gave in. Well, I have to say, Home Secretary, that if that is the sort of support you give to the people in positions of power when some party political act threatens them, I don't think it says much for the support you give to the people like the Metropolitan Commissioner.
We'll go on. A question from Roger Twinney, please. Roger Twinney.
I've recently retired. Would the panel advise me to deposit my savings with an Irish bank?
I've recently retired. Would the panel advise me to deposit my savings with an Irish bank in the context, of course, of money flooding across to Ireland after their guarantee of all deposits and flooding into Northern Rock and gold and B&B and all the rest of it? Richard Lambert, is that a sensible thing for Mr. Twinney to have done, and would you advise other people to do it?
I would never advise anybody to do anything with their money. I'll tell you what I do with my money. I leave it in the bank. I've got it in a good British bank. It's well managed, it's well capitalised, and it's going to stay there. And if you know, I just can't be bothered to. Maybe I should spread it around. I'm not going to.
Why?
I think that we've got to have confidence in the system. And I tell you what I do think. I think that the decision made by the Irish to give a full guarantee to all their depositors was an outrage. I think if we think back of history, you go back to the 1930s, what turned the crash into the Depression was that politicians around the world put up trade barriers. They went in for economic nationalism. They said, you know, we'll protect ourselves and beggar my neighbour, we don't care. This is what the Irish did this week. And I'm a great fan of the Irish economy and of the Irish government, but I think it was a really serious anti-European unfriendly act.
Can I tease out of you exactly why a government saying we promise to redeem deposit accounts in our banks is such a wicked thing to have done?
It's because, well, first of all, the guarantee is equivalent, I think, roughly to 3 times the gross national product of the Irish Republic. So it's fairly kind of staggering. If you're a taxpayer in Ireland, you would be seriously, I would be seriously.
Doesn't it mean they won't go broke, those banks, because the government backs them, or does it mean they'll take rash decisions because they know they're safe?
Well, certainly that. I mean, there are no impositions on the boards of these Irish banks to do anything at all, and they're not just protecting the depositors; they're protecting the bondholders and the shareholders. It's you could have said, you know, in the 1930s, you could say, well, America thought they were being threatened by foreign trade and so on, so they put up trade barriers. And so then they did the same in Europe, and they did the same in Japan. And the consequences of that was that the global economy froze up. I think that, luckily Ireland is quite a small economy, but I really think strongly that, first of all, the European Union ought to have a strong feeling about this, because it is a threat to our banks. You know, good people are asking the question you've just asked. And that's a dangerous question to be answering for, not just for, you know, our personal finances, but for the state of the economy, and I think for the broader kind of European Union. So I think we should be worried about it, and we should oppose it politically.
Mr. Twinney, what do you make of that?
It's interesting. I mean, the government gave a guarantee for Northern Rock. Now you can't get money into Northern Rock, so that was a limited guarantee. I don't understand. From where I sit...
buy national savings if you feel that nervous.
But that has a very poor rate of return. It appears to be a go to Ireland, no risk. Stay in the UK, there is risk.
Jackie Smith.
Well, first of all, I think Richard's absolutely right that the objective here surely has to be that people are confident with where they have saved their money. The action that has been taken over the last year, firstly, the action that was taken with Northern Rock, secondly, what we did over the weekend with Bradford and Bingley, means that there is no saver in this country who has lost money because of what is a very difficult and in many ways a fundamental issue for our financial services sector. But that has been done in this country in a way, for example, with respect to Bradford and Bingley, that does safeguard savers, also safeguards the taxpayer's position. That's been our objective throughout this. We've done what has been necessary up until now to make sure that no saver has lost a penny in this country despite the difficult circumstances, and that's what we need to continue doing as we face this difficult time.
Why did you put the level, or are going to put the level up of guarantee from £35,000 to £50,000? Isn't that saying to people, if you've got more than 50,000, don't trust the bank?
No, that's something that the Financial Services Authority have been consulting on, where we will come to a conclusion and announce it next week. But I think what people need to do is they need to look at the experience of what's happened so far. It is crucially important that people have confidence in the system. One, because it means that they actually feel confident about their savings and don't have the sort of run on the bank that is actually going to make that those difficulties in the system have contagion throughout the rest of it. But also, of course, because this isn't only even about people's savings, crucial though that is, it's also about having a system which is stable enough to ensure that people are still able to borrow money to buy houses, that small businesses and others are still able to borrow money in order to expand, that you can be confident about your savings, that you can be confident that actually the stability is doing everything it can to help you to keep your job. And I think Richard's also right that for us as a country, we have a solid economic basis. We have built it on being willing and able to trade and being open, and it's very important that we actually maintain that.
The woman in red there.
But isn't it the case that providing a guarantee to these banks essentially gives the bankers a get-out clause and thus provides an incentive to take unnecessary risks, the sort of things that could lead to problems in the future?
Michael Heseltine.
Well, Jackie says that no savers have lost money. That, of course, is not true. Huge numbers of savers have lost money as they've seen their pension funds dramatically reduced. Very large numbers of people have lost money on shares. And so there's a very big question as to how we got into this mess in the first place. But sticking very specifically to the issue, the reason, of course, the Labour Party adopted a 50,000 ceiling is because the Conservatives called for it. And so they raised their 35,000 to 50. But there is, I think, there is a serious issue in this ceiling, and it is this. There are two sorts of people who could easily have more than 50,000. The first are people who've sold their houses and are waiting to buy another one. 50,000 doesn't buy you much of a house in this country today. There could be lots of families, lots of people with very significant sums on deposit in banks because they are halfway between buying and selling houses. And I think that should be recognised. The second is elderly people. And of course, everybody should have watched the television, everybody should have made adjustments, they should have moved their money into different banks in different ownerships, so they had several £50,000 ceilings.
You really believe they should have done that? The opposite of what?
A lot of...
Just for the record, too, Lord Heseltine, £50,000 guarantee covers 97% of British bank deposits.
I fully understand that.
So
but you're saying people should have taken the action that he was saying it would be absolutely wrong in terms of...
too lazy to do it. I'm not saying it's wrong.
It isn't what I think, it's what people are doing.
Have you moved all your money into little pots of different banks?
I haven't. But the fact is
not enough banks to go round.
A large number...
Rather cheap start, I would say. Yeah, done.
A large number of people have got the sort of sums of money well above £50,000. And as I say, there are two categories. But the second category are the elderly. And of course, people watching television, working it all out, they can work out that they should move their money so that they have a £50,000 limit in any one bank and they're protected. I would guarantee that if the worst came to it, there would be some harrowing cases of elderly people with a couple of £100,000 who said, no one told us, we didn't know. There always are, in tragedies, people who didn't know, weren't told. And I think that the authorities should recognise these two categories in the ceilings that they're talking about.
Well, create a separate category for them. All right, Charles Kennedy.
It's understandable that people will want to behave like this. It's entirely desirable that they don't. In fact, now that we've heard it from Michael Heseltine, if he's not moving his money around as we speak, that's good enough for a pauper like me, I can tell you that. The gentleman mentions national savings. From what I see and hear from people round about just today, problem with national savings is you could try and pour a lot of money in there if you want. Trying to get somebody at the other end of the phone, so many other people are engaged in the same process, is mightily difficult. It seems to be a case of don't phone us, we'll phone you right now. I think two things are needed. One is clarity from the government. There's a lot of people still out there, whether it's 35,000, 50,000, who don't appreciate, and it's not been made terribly clear, that an amount of money that you've got with a bank and another or equivalent amount of money that you've got somewhere else may in fact not all be liable for compensation or security because they're part of the same overall group. So there's a big education process, information process. I don't think the government have been clear enough about that. The other thing is the European dimension, and I agree with what Richard was saying about Ireland. You can't have, particularly the globalised nature of this problem and the fact that we're all part of a single European market, albeit not all of us part of a single European currency. You can't have people going off freelancing like this, which is why the weekend summit that Gordon Brown's going to is very important. I hope we can get a coordinated European response. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. Or if we don't, what's happening at an alarming extent, or becoming an alarming extent within the UK, is going to be replicated right across Europe. And that's going to make everybody in an even more precarious position than we are at the moment.
OK, Janet Street-Porter.
Well, I'm kind of fascinated when Jackie says that the country's got a solid economic base, because the fact of the matter is the number of people, it doesn't matter what Michael says, he's rich, he's posh, most of the people in this country have not got 50,000 quid in the bank. Most of the people in this country, under the tutelage of Gordon Brown as Chancellor, have built up more personal debt than more per capita personal debt than any other country in the EU. We've been brilliant at giving people money for nothing and telling people you can have something on credit. So most people in this country with this, I mean, sir, you are in the minority. You asked the question about your 50,000 quid in the bank, but I can't imagine that a lot of people watching this programme have that problem. If they're not rich bankers in the city, most people don't have 5,000 quid in the bank, let alone 50. It would be... I mean, it's criminal.
Okay.
Gordon Brown talks about caring about the poor, but if he cared about the poor so much, he'd teach them the value of money age 4 and upwards, so that by the time they left school, they wouldn't have 10 credit cards and run up the level of debt that we have in this country.
Richard Lambert, briefly.
Just very quickly, until a year ago, nobody asked the question about what deposit guarantees were, because it's irrelevant. The really important thing is not the size of the deposit guarantee, it's restoring stability to the banking system. That's a job for politicians and bankers, and that's the thing that really has to be done.
Can I just Janet, of course you're right. The vast majority of people do not have the sort of sums we're talking about, but the people who do are the most vulnerable, the retired whose savings are at risk. That's why it's so important.
But very briefly,
The key point to maintain confidence is that people feel, as we've said, that we will do everything necessary in order to safeguard their savings. Bradford and Bingley, which of course where there was a problem, we used the powers that we had put in place in the banking bill earlier this year in order to transfer people's savings to Abbey Santander to safeguard them, with a sort of guarantee behind that necessary, incidentally, Michael, using powers that had been opposed by the Tories when we tried to bring them in exactly the same way as they opposed the approach that we took to Northern Rock, and as they opposed the approach that we took last week to preventing people through short selling from profiting and making even more instability in the system.
So frankly, we opposed it because we had an alternative way of achieving the same end.
All right. I want to go back to the woman in red who asked a question which hasn't been answered, and we've actually got a question here on that line. But just repeat what you said, and then I'll go to the questioner at the back there.
But don't actions like this, taking these safeguards, undermine the system in the long term? Because it allows the bankers to think that they've got a get-out clause. It allows them to think that no bank is ever going to be allowed to go bust. So it makes them take unnecessary risks.
OK, and I'm going to tie that in with a question from Yolande Fernando Pulle, please.
is it right that the taxpayer here and in America should bail out financial institutions which may have been speculating with their investors' money?
So the 2 points together, is it just simply right for the taxpayers and doesn't just encourage the bankers to be reckless? Who'd like to take that? Michael Heseltine?
Of course, in an ideal world, one would expect those who take the risk to pay the price. And many of them do, in losing their jobs or losing their shares in the businesses or whatever it may be. But the fact of the matter is, you have to weigh the alternatives. And the banks going under, the financial credit of the way our country works collapsing is not just about bankers. It affects all of us. And this is why the American debate going on now, which of course reflected the resentment of the ordinary American punter against Wall Street, is actually, although understandable, misleading and misguided. Because the fact is, if you can't get credit from your bank, it freezes investment, it slows up the whole credit business in the economy, and you'll already see, I mean, it's only just beginning, but those of us who are involved in commerce in one way or another, we know that every day more and more worrying news is coming out of the economy. Not the financial sector just, right through the economy. Look what's happening on the high street, the level of sales. Look what's happening in the motor industry, the number of cars that are not happening, the beginning of 4-day weeks in the manufacturing industry, the collapse of Britain's export markets. All these things are beginning to happen. You ain't seen nothing yet. Okay. That's why, on a balance of argument, you have to save the financial system.
Charles Kennedy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this that does feel very offensive. There's no doubt about that. It does feel very offensive to people, and understandably so. But it is the least worst option. That is the awful truth of the matter. And I think it sticks in the gullet for many of us that people who have poured paraffin in the flames of this situation are going to walk away not just scot-free, but probably walk away the richer still more. That's ridiculous. But it is correct, and you are seeing this and you are hearing this, that once business can't invest, just take the construction sector. Historically in this country, construction hugely important as it is to any economy. If you look at unemployment, which I fear is now going to rocket in the next 6 months or so, it's certainly starting in construction and construction-related activity, right through the economy. If you look at whether it's private finance initiatives or whether it's more publicly orientated finance initiatives, nonetheless, a lot of things that were going to happen, civic improvements, infrastructure improvements, things that make the economy more competitive and make the quality of our lives better, are now being put on hold because the money is not flowing. Now, we've got to get that back, or unemployment goes up, the bills to the state as a result of people being idle, with all the social hardships that causes and the economic strains it puts on the country as a whole, are going to get worse. And of course, you begin to, if you're not careful, dip into recession. So yes, it's not palatable what's happening, but my God, if we were sitting here in 6 or 12 months' time and this kind of action hadn't been taken, it would be a damn sight worse. That's the sad truth of the matter.
Yes. The woman on the gangway there, yes, just briefly if you would.
How much longer will it take before things start to get better, and how much worse are they going to get before we see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Okay, who'll have a go at that, and then we'll move off the economy onto something else. Yes, Richard.
I think it's going to be a tough 18 months. I don't know how tough, but we are already, I think, in a mild recession, and I think that through 2009 it's going to feel uncomfortable. I hope that in the not too distant future it will be possible for the Bank of England to cut interest rates. I hope that, contrary to what Lord Heseltine says, that actually exports will start to lift. After all, sterling has been weak in the last months, and so trade is actually bolstering somewhat. I hope that will bolster it. And I hope, above all, that this dreadful kind of freeze-up in the credit market unglues itself and we can start going back to proper business. And if that happens, then by the end of next year we'll be feeling better.
Okay. All done?
I don't think anyone knows.
All right. The question began with Roger Twinney and whether he should move his deposit savings to an Irish bank. Just a matter of curiosity, how many of you have taken evasive action in the last sort of week or so, months or so, just to see? One or two, very few. Three.
Anyone on the panel there, Chairman?
I don't know anyone on the panel. I didn't know about that. I'm not going to ask the panel. What have you done as a matter of interest?
split it up. And like Mr. Twinney, I'm also coming up to retirement. And I'm rather disappointed that the panel actually haven't answered his question. His question
but
was...
I'm a pensioner. Hang on. I'm a pensioner with money in the bank. And I got up this morning and it was the first thing I thought about. And it's, to be honest, if I'm really honest with you, I've thought about it all day and I asked Richard for advice. And he gave me his advice and I'm going to ignore it.
You mean it's off to Ireland?
We are both in the same bank, he told me earlier.
Yeah, and you're ignoring his advice?
I'm going to move some of my money, yeah.
All right, OK. Somebody else, yes, you said the back
you
there.
know what your first phone call tomorrow morning will be.
And the woman there in blue, yes, just out of curiosity.
Split it up, and I suppose I was listening to what people were saying and was thinking that I think I've worked very hard, I'm not suggesting anyone on the panel hasn't, to get the money I have, and I'm very, very unconfident about taking the risk, which it seems that the panel members are. And I kind of get the idea that panel members maybe are in the know a bit more than I am, and if were they to decide something different and shift their money, would they tell me? So I've taken early action.
OK. Let's go on. Thank you very much. Just before we go on, where is question time next? We're in Hackney in London, favoured part of London for the Home Secretary next week. And
didn't get it.
What? The place you didn't think people walked around late at night, but we're before midnight, so it's probably right. We've got the University Secretary, John Denham, with us, and the Bishop of Rochester, Dr. Nazir Ali. Then we're in Stoke the week after that. And I don't know whether there's going to be a reshuffle, but at the moment we're having the Chief Whip, Jeff Hoon, with us, confident that he'll still be in post. Now, the next thing is that we're going to be in Washington, not Washington in the north of England, but Washington, D.C., at the end of October, just a few days before the American elections. So if you'd like to come to Hackney or Stoke or Washington, or more important, know anybody in the Washington area who might like to come to Question Time, the same number is the right one to call, 0871 626 9988, or you can apply via our website. Now let's come down to good old politics. Deborah Smith, please.
Has David Cameron done enough to convince voters he's the right man with the right plan?
His very words here in Birmingham this week. Charles Kennedy.
No, I don't think he has, and I don't think he would have expected to have achieved that in the course of an hour or indeed several days of a much disrupted Conservative Party conference. It was interesting. I was driving in my car and listening to 5 Live, and I listened to the entire speech for an hour on the radio, which is not something I've done with a political speech for a long time. And I'm less critical, or negative, in fact, than some of the commentators have been. It's a bit, you mentioned the American presidential elections. At this time, when there's a presidential election, they always replay the Nixon-JFK debates, and people listening on the radio thought Nixon won, and people watching on TV thought Kennedy had won. I thought it was a better structured, better delivered speech, listening to it. Watching it later on, I began to see where some of the criticisms perhaps were coming from. So that in itself, the medium's got a lot to do with it, I think. But no, he's not persuaded people, and he wouldn't have been trying as yet to persuade people. I think he's in for a very, and I think he knows this, in for a very tough time now, because a long parliament, which it looks almost certainly this is going to be, is a very difficult thing for the leader of the larger opposition party, to maintain such a big lead. When you've got very little to achieve, the main event is not coming your way, which is the general election. That's going to be tough for him. And I would have avoided, having been kind about his speech, I would have avoided the man with the plan line, and I would have avoided also, beware the politician or any public figure who says, now today I want to talk to you about character. And by the way, I want to talk to you about my character. It's a very good character. Now, I'm sure David's is a very good character, but I don't think you should put it that way if you want to get that point over to people. That should speak for itself.
Janet.
I don't think he has done enough to convince voters. But there again, very few voters will do what Charles has done and listen to the speech as a whole, because we live in a soundbite society, and man with a plan, you can see how he constructed the speech to come up with the one or two sound bites that would be replayed endlessly.
We all have to do it. Yes.
Yeah, everything's in 10 to 15 second sound bites. I think the main thing that wasn't in the speech was any policies, and what people are crying out for now are alternatives to Labour. They've got Labour fatigue, they've got Gordon Brown fatigue, and they just say, come up, tell us what you're going to do. And it's absolutely bloody perverse that he won't. He won't say what he's going to do. He talks about slimming down the machinery of government. Well, that is a crowd pleaser, and that's obviously the thing to do. The other thing that he said, which would resonate very well with the electorate, was dealing with the scandal of mixed awards in hospitals, which I'm amazed that Labour, Lord Darcy, hasn't done something more about. What did he say? He was going to have lots of rooms. That's not really an answer, but it was still more than Labour have said. So he said one or two things that were good, but they didn't add up to a whole load of policies.
All right. Richard Lambert.
Well, I think he had quite a tough job to do this week, because for a start he had to get out of the box that Mr. Brown had put him in as a kind of novice and a hopeless new beginner. So he had to be quite aggressive on that. But he also, because of what was going on in the rest of the world, had not to be rocking the boat. So it's kind of on the one hand jabbing with the left, and on the other hand being kind of supportive and all that stuff.
Did you think his argument about if it was experienced the county would have Gordon Brown forever was a convincing way of putting the point?
I must say I gave a little gasp of pleasure when I heard that. I thought that's all right. I'll go for that.
What, for Gordon Brown forever?
No, I thought it was a good bit of oratory. I think my sense of it is, though, that at the moment it's more that people are fed up with Labour than that they're swept away by the Tories. And I think the Tories would make a big mistake if they just sat back and waited for something to fall in their lap, because we've got, as Charles said, a long time to go, and a lot of rocky things are going to happen over the next year. And if they just wait for it to happen, they might end up in the wrong place from their
There's
point
a
of view.
lot of talk about whether they're convincing on the economy, whether George Osborne is persuasive. Just very briefly, do you think they've got a good story or a good line to take on the economy that persuades you, as the head of the CBI, that they would be the right people to run it?
I think they still have a lot to talk about and get clear in their minds about what they think the economy is. I don't think it's as clear where they stand on the economy as, for example, it was in Mrs. Thatcher's days. It's not nearly as clear as that where they're coming from. I think also what I slightly felt cross about in Mr. Cameron's speech on Tuesday, which I thought was a good speech when he came on and said calm down about the money and all that. He did kind of conflate, he was kind of conflating business and the financial turmoil into one thing, and actually they're separate things, and I think he needs to get a clear idea of why business matters to our society.
The woman up there on the right.
One thing that did worry me about Cameron's speech, like compared to Brown's, was that he seemed to, he wanted to fix the economy through taking hard action which would probably hit the poorer communities and poorer citizens hard, and I don't think that will have won him many votes.
Michael Heseltine, do you agree with that?
Yes, it's a very fair point. One of the most common criticisms of politicians is that you can't believe a word they say. And of course, we're all in the business of putting over the best case we can for our own party and what we believe. So when David stands up and says, look, I have to tell you, it's very serious, and I don't have good news, and it's going to get worse. Actually, that requires a lot of guts. It is going to get worse. We have got a major problem on our hands, and he had the guts to say it. You're absolutely right, that's not the way to win votes, but it is the way to preserve your integrity. Now, the key question is, did he do enough? And the only answer to that question is we will know on polling night sometime in 2010. He happens to be in a position where he's got one of the biggest polling leads, last time I saw any polls, of any opposition leader in British history, and a government which has got one of the least popular prime ministers, again, in polling history. So he must be doing something right, but the important thing, always, is that governments lose long before oppositions win. And the moment that a government becomes unpopular, they clamour for the opposition to say what they would do. And why do they do that? Either because they get good ideas from the opposition, which this government systematically adopts, or they want to divert attention away from their own mistakes in order to hide their own difficulties. And I found Gordon Brown's argument, look, I've got experience. What was he actually saying? I've dug the biggest economic hole in British history, and I've taken 10 years... There's more to come. There's more to come. And I've got right deep in this hole, and I've got the experience to do what? To fill in the hole? No, no, to keep digging.
Have the Conservatives actually changed? They keep talking about how they've changed this week, but to me all these changes only seem to be quite skin deep. At the heart they still seem like the old Etonian kind of old boys club that they always have been.
Is that how you see them, Jack Smith? Old Shrewsbury boys?
Unlike Richard, I didn't gasp with pleasure at any point during David Cameron's speech, although, you know, I accept it was a well-received speech. I actually thought the line, man with a plan, was quite a good line. The trouble was that then the plan wasn't actually there, and we never got to see what the plan was. I think the fundamental problem, and actually where I agree with Michael, of course, is that in the end it will be, quite rightly, the British people who will determine whether or not and who should be the next government in this country, and nobody should take the British people for granted. But what I do know is that you can't form a government on the basis of a party that is one man deep and no policies wide, and people will want to know what any party that is standing to form a government in this country is going to do. And incidentally, they will want to know both what your experience is and also what your judgment is. Now, I agree with David Cameron that judgment is important. Where I disagree is that he's shown the right judgment, not least on what I've already described with respect to the wrong decisions at almost every occasion over the last year with respect to the financial crisis, but being unclear about what we need to do, for example, about energy policy in this country. Is it or is it not the case for the Tories that nuclear energy is only a last resort? About having decided on tax cuts and choosing a tax cut that benefits the top 3,000 estates in this country, thereby showing where their priorities lie. And when it comes to George Osborne, Michael, perhaps you can answer us on the supposed council tax pledge. Is it or is it not the case that the pledge is that everybody in this country will have their council tax frozen for the first 2 years of a Conservative government? Because actually, I read the small print, and I advise everybody else to read the small print.
Well,
and when you do, that is not actually the pledge that was being made.
Let's leave it there.
People didn't make that pledge.
People can decide on the minutiae. The question was whether the speech as a whole worked. But I thank you very much. I want to go on to a last question on a quite different and serious topic, which is from Josh Thomas, please. Josh Thomas.
Given the number of British people travelling to Switzerland to end their lives, do you think it's time for a rethink on the laws surrounding assisted suicide?
There's a case before the High Court on this which we won't discuss, but on the general point, Charles Kennedy?
Well, my understanding is that the Home Secretary obviously can confirm, but there's been about 100 cases of people in this country who have assisted somebody to go to abroad, with Switzerland in particular, I think it is, to for terminal cases of this kind. As far as I'm aware, I think I'm right in saying there hasn't actually been a formal prosecution of any of the 100 so far. The issue at the moment, legally as I understand it, not the specific case, but the overall legal position, is that what's being sought here is proper clarification being handed down by the Director of Public Prosecutions. And that's not yet forthcoming, and I think it's slightly up in the air whether it will be forthcoming. Instinctively, on the broad issue, as opposed to the technicalities, I'm at the wary end of the spectrum on this one. I really am, because I think that the thin edge of the wedge argument can apply. Last time I think it was debated in one of the Houses of Parliament was the House of Lords, where I don't think it certainly didn't find approval then. I think we're right to be cautious, but I do think at the same time, with 100 cases having gone really untested or unpursued, I don't put that pejoratively, I think that clarity is going to be needed, and that's perhaps what will come as a result of the current court proceedings.
Okay. Janet Street Porter.
It does seem terrible that somebody who is dying, who knows that they have an incurable illness, has to resort to all the stressful mechanism of going to court to resolve how their life can end and the role that their partner or husband might play in that. I find that very distressing, and listening to the woman talk on the radio this morning was very worrying, really. A couple of weeks ago, Mary Walnut talked about, giving people who've got dementia the right to die, and this caused a huge outrage. But obviously, with an increasingly elderly population and with an increasing number of people with illnesses like MS that, don't at this moment have a cure, we have to allow people to choose how to end their life, and we have to perhaps rethink how they do it. I don't think the current situation is acceptable, really. It's not right that people should have to travel to another country. I do feel that if you talk to people in the street, they find it absolutely bizarre that if someone wants to die, they have to go to Switzerland to do so.
In other words, it should be legal here.
Yeah.
All right. The woman in green there, yes.
What's not right is that the elderly are not able to be looked after in their own country, in the state that they've paid taxes for the NHS to look after them.
That isn't the point here, with great respect. But
well, if they were actually looked
say.
After when they're elderly in this country, they wouldn't want to have a right to die.
We're talking about more severe cases than that, I think, though. Jackie Smith.
This is one of those issues that certainly when it comes in front of Parliament, and Charles is right, it has come in front of Parliament largely through private members' bills on several occasions recently, is one where people vote on the basis of conscience. I mean, my personal view on this is rather like Charles. I think you described yourself as being at the wary end of the spectrum. So am I. I do think, actually, and whilst I don't completely agree with that lady that we don't look after our elderly people properly, I do tend to think that I would rather we were focusing our effort, as we have done, on how you support people best at the end of their lives to die with dignity, but not to feel that they are forced either into taking their own life or getting somebody else to take it for them. I would much rather we were focusing our efforts on supporting hospices, on the sort of research that enables you to die in a pain-free way and with dignity. That's my personal view on this, and that's where I would rather we were focusing our effort.
Richard Lambert, we're coming towards the end, so we have to be rather
briefly. I'm
brief.
with Charles Kennedy. I would be uncomfortable to be in a society where assisted suicide was legal, because it would just make me uneasy about, as you describe it, the thin end of the wedge. I think the law should be clarified, and if people aren't going to be prosecuted for taking their loved ones to Switzerland, that should be clear, and they should be allowed to do it. But I personally, I wouldn't want to go beyond that.
But it would be acceptable to you that it was accepted that you could go abroad?
Exactly. The law ought to be clearer, I think.
All right. Michael Heseltine.
Well, we're all at the wary end. I mean, you don't have any need for any imagination to think of the most horrendous tensions and problems and exploitations that could flow from careless, irresponsible legislation. But as I understand this case, this was a lady who is dying and wanted to be sure that if she went abroad, her husband would not suffer as a consequence of helping her. I think that's what the issue is. And I think the black and white answer is she is entitled to have the clearest possible legal opinion about that. I don't think it should, to me, without being a lawyer, I don't think it should be necessary to go to court to get that opinion. I mean, we have law officers of the Crown, they ought to be able to give a pretty clear and free opinion on something of that sort. My guess is that, Charles rightly gave the sort of figures, this is happening. I think it will happen on a bigger scale. I don't think society in the end will accept the view that it's all right if you do it overseas. I think if it becomes a sufficiently understandable problem in the ageing population, in the end Parliament will address the issue. but from a very wary perspective.
Just to clarify the position at the moment, the DPP hasn't prosecuted any of the 100 citizens who have gone abroad, and this High Court case is to get a judicial review of that, an assurance that there won't be a prosecution in this case in advance. That rather somber note brings us to the end of Question Time for the week. The debate will continue. If you want to watch more on BBC News Channel with Question Time Extra, chaired as ever by Chris Eakin, who'll be discussing reactions to the programme. There's an edited version of Question Time. That's on Saturday on the News Channel, 8:30 in the evening. My thanks to all of you who came here to be on the panel in Birmingham, and to all of you who came to the university to take part in the discussion. We're in Hackney next week. University Secretary John Denham, Bishop of Rochester, Nazir Ali. If you want to be in that audience, just a reminder, 0871 626 9988, or go to our website, bbc.co.uk/question time. And don't forget to stay up till 2 in the morning to see the great vice presidential debate in the United States. From all of us here in Birmingham, good night.
I was so nearly born an American. I came that close. I've been curious to discover more about the world of my other self.
I and a trusty London cab will be visiting each and every one of the 50 of the United States of America.
I really don't know if anything sums up America better. It's simultaneously preposterous, wonderful, American.
Take the ultimate road trip. Stephen Fry in America, coming soon to BBC One.